I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, shock in Spain. One man is dead and a Catholic priest seriously wounded after an attack on a pair of Catholic churches. We have the latest. Pro-abortion vandalism. Analysis of the Department of Justice indictments against two people who targeted pro-life pregnancy centers. Surprise bombing. At least a dozen are injured in an African country the Holy Father is set to visit soon. And a rising star. Meet a religious sister who once served on a destroyer in the US Navy. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on this feast of Saints Timothy and Titus. Our top story tonight. This week, pro-abortion House and Senate Democrats have marked what would have been the 50th anniversary of Roe versus Wade and declared their movement will not back down against Republicans' efforts to restrict or limit access to abortions. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has more.
A group of pro-abortion Democratic senators led by Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Catholics Patty Murray and Dick Durbin and others gathered outside the U.S. Supreme Court to decry the overturning of Roe. They had a message for Republican lawmakers and their pro-life agenda.
We will block the outrageous bills they send our way. We are going to keep putting forth common sense legislation to protect our most fundamental rights and to restore Roe once and for all.
New York Democrat Chuck Schumer condemned GOP attempts such as those of Senator Lindsey Graham to enact abortion bans at the federal level as un-American.
The American people said hell no to efforts to undermine abortion access in the country, as the last election showed. America is on our side completely.
As the event ended, Senator Mazie Hirono was the only lawmaker left when I got to ask a question. Yeah, Senator Lindsey Graham has come up with a 15-week abortion ban. Any sort of number, any sort of compromise that Democrats would be willing to do? And if not, then does that mean that Democrats believe abortion should take place even up until the date of birth?
We are supporting the women's right to the health care right, and that is the bill that we are supporting.
So no number at all? No number at all would be a compromise?
We're supporting the bill that we all talked about, so that's pretty much it as far as I'm concerned.
Senate Republicans are pushing to protect life. Nearly all of them have co-sponsored a bill to codify the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits the use of taxpayer dollars for abortions. Senator James Langford says he's fighting for the unborn.
Are some children really disposable and some children are valuable? That's the question each of us need to decide. And I'm proud to stand with those who have marched for 50 years to say children are valuable. All of them.
Meanwhile, House lawmakers are voting on a Republican bill to limit President Biden's authority to withdraw oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It would also increase drilling on federal land. Republicans tell me that America needs to be energy independent and lower what we pay at the gas pump. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
In Philadelphia, it is the third day of the trial of a pro-life father of 7. Mark Houck is charged with assaulting a volunteer at a Planned Parenthood clinic. Today, that volunteer testified, saying in part that he never said a word to Houck nor his son, and instead it was Houck who threatened him and pushed him to the ground. Mark Houck strongly denies the charges. If found guilty, he faces 11 years in prison. For many, it seems like at long last, the DOJ is dishing out justice to abortion activists who vandalized pro-life properties in Florida. Caleb Freestone and Amber Smith Stewart are charged with attacking pro-life centers, including one owned by the Archdiocese of Miami. They allegedly spray-painted threatening language on the buildings and now face up to 12 years in prison. So, are the wheels of justice now in motion, and will other pregnancy resource centers also get a nod from the feds? And joining us tonight with answers is Jeremy Dyes, Special Counsel for Litigation and Communications at First Liberty Institute. Jeremy, thanks for being on today. We really appreciate it. For those who are not familiar with this story, can you give us a quick overview?
Yeah, I think we all remember this past summer when over 100 different pregnancy resource centers from Miami all the way up to Massachusetts and everything in between suffered all kinds of vandalism, broken windows, fire bombings in some places, spray paint, and even spray painting around just vulgar messages around statues of the Virgin Mary. These were all efforts to intimidate, harass, and otherwise scare people away from providing these services. Now, we know what pregnancy care centers do in this country. They help women and their children in times of crisis pregnancies. They do such crazy things like giving away free diapers and free baby formula and teaching them how to be good parents. And yet everyone from these terrorists all the way to Senator Warren and attorneys general in the state of Massachusetts have condemned these pregnancy care centers and their activity. I'm so glad to see the federal government finally getting around to prosecuting some of these ne'er-do-wells, and I hope that they receive the full book of justice thrown at them. And
I understand that many of your clients work at the 100-plus pro-life centers that have been hit by these vandals over the past year. What have you been hearing from them, if anything, about these arrests, and are they encouraged?
They've been terribly perplexed, and by this arrest, they find themselves wonderfully encouraged that finally it seems like they had thought that at this point they would see no justice whatsoever at any point, and that these two arrests have been made, that the indictment has been brought down. There's hope in the future that perhaps they'll be made whole as well. But I got to tell you, there's a whole lot more of these pregnancy resource centers, including the ones that were attacked. Criminal charges are certainly appropriate, but the FACE Act, the Free Access to Clinic Entrances, protects pregnancy resource centers as well. And we are eager to defend them and ensure that they are made whole for the wrongful actions that have been taken against their facilities. And so we look forward to working at firstliberty.org to protect these religious institutions and many others to be able to practice the faith that they so much love.
Jeremy, talk to us about the DOJ response up until now, or lack thereof.
Yeah, look, I think it's no big secret that the president has taken and his administration has taken a position that is counter to these pregnancy resource centers. Senator Warren has come out and investigated people like Heartbeat of Miami, Heartbeat International. At least she's tried to investigate Heartbeat International, and we've told them no. The Attorney General of Massachusetts has accused these pregnancy resource centers of deceptive trade practices, and we've had to respond to that as well. So I think when the Department of Justice was tasked with investigating these vandalism crimes, there was a real concern that the political ideology shared by the administration might trickle its way down to members of law enforcement. I think we're all now encouraged to see these individual FBI agents and, in fact, the U.S. attorneys that have been tasked with it now indicting members of Antifa that have charged or have spray painted terrible messages like, we're coming for you and you're not safe, and if abortion is not safe, then neither are you. There are men and women that have volunteered their hours that are in real danger. And so this now sense of relief, I think, when the wheels of justice have begun to put in motion, I think is palpably felt by many of these volunteers across the country. And
Jeremy, we have probably about a minute left or so, but final thoughts.
Yeah, look, I think if you're one of these pregnancy resource centers that has found yourself on the wrong end of these vandals, there are options and resources available to you that we would love to be able to discuss with you. So I'd encourage them to go to firstliberty.org so we can get in touch. Every religious institution deserves the right to be able to execute their mission according to the way that they see fit to do so without being violently harassed by those who are ideologically driven against you. Thank you for the DOJ for doing what they've done so far in this investigation and indictment. We hope that they will continue to make these pregnancy resource centers whole by honoring their commitment, not only to their commitment to life, but to religious liberty at its foundational level.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on today and for your insights. Really appreciate them.
Thank you.
All right, well, staying in the United States, President Joe Biden claims his economic plan is working. He traveled to Virginia today to tout the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. But conservatives say liberal policies are hurting Americans, and they point to rising inflation and higher costs across the nation. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
Tracy, as Americans continue spending more for things like gas, groceries, and mortgages, the resilience of the U.S. job market has been a major surprise. Unemployment last month, 3.5%, matching a 53-year low. But most economists think the economy will slide into at least a mild recession by mid-year.
Good afternoon to the Steamfitters Local 602.
President Joe Biden speaks to labor union workers at a shop in Springfield, Virginia.
Just this morning, we got some very good news about the American economy.
The president happy with new numbers that show the U.S. economy grew 2.9% last quarter, getting a boost from resilient consumer spending and underscoring the nation is not in a recession.
And I'm not sure, and I mean it sincerely, the news could have been any better. Economic growth is up.
But the economy is expected to slow down in the months ahead. That's due to the Federal Reserve's hiking interest rates, aimed at crushing the worst inflation in 4 decades.
Also making headlines, former President Donald Trump. Meta agreed to restore his Facebook account after a 2-year ban. It could help his campaign for president in 2024. Although the New York Times reports that more than a third of Republican National Committee members want a different candidate to win the GOP primary. And Students for Life says Florida Governor Ron DeSantis won their recent straw poll. It was taken at the National Pro-Life Summit, beating President Trump. The organization's president, Kristen Hawkins, wrote, "Expectations are high that candidates will compete to show their commitment to protecting life in law and in service."
Separately tonight, the White House is also continuing its push against anti-Semitism. Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff left today for Poland and Germany to remind people about the Holocaust and remember the victims. And he's also meeting with Holocaust survivors. In addition, part of his visit will include a roundtable with Jewish, Muslim, and Christian faith leaders on interfaith dialogue and understanding. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Oh, we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including a sad day in Spain, new developments in the deadly attack on 2 Catholic churches, and why Catholic journalists from around the world are gathering in Lourdes. We are back tonight. One worker at a Catholic church is dead and a Catholic priest is seriously wounded following a pair of attacks at Catholic churches in southern Spain. Officials say they are investigating to see if it is terror related. The suspect was seen entering the church after Mass and assaulted a priest. The assailant then went to a second church where he killed the caretaker. Police have arrested a suspect. The injured priest is in stable condition. At least a dozen people in the Democratic Republic of Congo were injured earlier today in a bombing. This is one of many violent actions devastating eastern Congo as groups and militia fight for land and power. So far, no one has taken responsibility for the attack. Pope Francis is set to visit the country later this month. The Kremlin is accusing the United States and Germany of, quote, direct involvement in the war in Ukraine. Dmitry Peskov points to the delivery of tanks from the U.S. and Germany earlier this week. Meantime, Russia continues to launch attacks on Ukraine, saying they are going after military units. Ukraine accuses Moscow of targeting civilians. An auxiliary bishop in Mexico celebrated Mass yesterday in honor of the journalists who have been killed in the country. Bishop Francisco Javier Acera honored the media members and their families. One report says between 2000 and 2018, 134 journalists in the North American nation were killed. The Mass coincided with yesterday's feast of St. Francis de Sales, the patron saint of journalists. St. Francis de Sales also was a topic of conversation in France, particularly the Shrine at Lourdes, which is hosting the Catholic Media Federation's International Day in his honor. More than 250 journalists from around 24 countries will attend the meetings. They're discussing the most important issues in Catholic media. EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Andreas Thonhauser is in France and caught up with the head of the Vatican's communications department.
We're here in front of the Basilica in Lourdes, and with me is Dr. Paolo Ruffini, the prefect of the Dicastery of Communication. Dr. Ruffini, Professor Ruffini, you're here with a pilgrimage for journalists in Lourdes. Why is it important for the Dicastery to co-organize something like that?
Why it is important? I think it's important to meet each other here and pray together also, to weave our communion as journalists and to share how difficult it is to testimony in our times of division, of confusion, and to discern how can we bring the truth to the world and find the truth in our work that sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes we know that we can misunderstand, or we can be not so able to see the truth. And praying together, sharing thoughts together, discerning together is the best way to weave our communion as Christian, Catholic, and journalists.
And for you personally, how do we manage to communicate the gospel in our modern world?
Communicate the gospel is not just telling something, because the truth is already told by someone that is God. So I think that the best thing that we can do is trying to be Christian and testimony to be how we are, doing our job, and also thinking that the job of a journalist is important, but a lot of other jobs are important. Loving each other, this is from what we will be recognized. This is the best thing to have in mind when we try to do our job. And the message of Pope Francis in this year, focusing on the heart, so focusing on charity, on love, is something that means a lot to our job, to see through the eyes of the heart, to see through the eyes of love.
Many journalists from all over the world coming here, especially from Europe, but also other parts of the world. We've heard a lot of talks, lectures. What will you take with you personally? What have you learned already?
Well, the first thing I learned is that how we are interested to listen to the others. And we are discussing a lot of things, starting from the lesson of our Saint Francis de Sales, and then how do we have to deal with the difficult issues, from abuses or anything that we have to deal with. And the most important, I think I'm taking at this time is that to have the humility and the humble to know that we don't know everything, and we will learn by doing, and we learn by doing this job we have to do with love and with mercy and listening our heart and the hearts of the others. This is what at this point I'm taking with me, how difficult is our job and how we can learn by doing, weaving the communion in Christ we are.
Thank you very much, Prefect Ruffini, Prefect of the Dicastery for Communications of the Vatican in Lourdes, Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, Ship Shape Sister. Meet the religious sister who once served on a US Navy destroyer. Welcome back. She once wore the cloth of the nation, then traded it out for a habit, a veil, and a higher calling. Sister Maris Stella Karalekas is a graduate of the US Naval Academy and served 5 years as a surface warfare officer on a Navy destroyer. Then she met the Sisters of Life, and her own life took an unexpected turn. And joining us tonight is Sister Maris Stella of the Sisters of Life in Denver. Sister Maris, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I know that you say that during those hundreds of days at sea on the naval destroyer, the Blessed Sacrament was on board with you, and you were stirred to do really something great and meaningful beyond what you were already doing. Can you talk to us more about that time in your life?
Oh, sure. Yeah, those were great days when I was in the Navy. And, you know, they say that Aquinas tells us that grace builds on nature and perfects nature. So I think being a naval officer, I had a desire to do something great with my life, sacrifice and service, but ultimately giving my life to Christ, it was the greatest offering I could give, and what Jesus was really inviting me to. And so during my times of prayer, I really heard that invitation from the Lord and knew it was the fulfillment of all my desires.
Yeah, you really felt that call from God. It's so wonderful. And then you met the Sisters of Life. Tell us about that moment and what struck out the most about their way of life and their mission to you.
Yeah, when I met our community, I couldn't believe it existed in the church and in the world. It was everything I was seeing in my own heart being lived out, and this respect we have for the dignity of every human life, and proclaiming that people shouldn't be loved for what they do, achieve, or produce, but for who they are. And our work on behalf of human life, serving women who are pregnant and in difficult situations, and our hope and healing mission are just such profound messages that are needed for our world today. And the sisters, our prayer life is exactly what my heart was being shaped for this Eucharistic adoration. I knew that this was the place where my heart would meet the heart of Christ.
It's so beautiful. You mentioned, one of the main missions of your order is to tend to pregnant women. What does that look like for you and your fellow sisters, maybe on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. First of all, it all begins with prayer. Without our Lord and the Eucharist, we would have nothing to give, nothing to offer. So our times of prayer really strengthen us and nourish us and give us the grace we need to serve others. But we serve women in a variety of different ways. We have a convent where pregnant women live with us, and they'll come to us when they're pregnant and stay for maybe 6 months to a year after their babies are born. And then we also serve hundreds of women who we meet in a variety of different ways, and who are needing all kinds of different support in order to be able to choose life for their children. And we know so often that when women experience being loved for who they are, they can choose life for their children. And when they know the gift of their own lives, they're able to have the courage to choose life for their own children.
Yeah. And what is that like for you, working with them?
Oh, it's such a tremendous privilege. I see women making heroic choices for life, despite obstacles, despite all the struggles they may be having. It's the natural desire of a woman's heart to choose life and to give life. And so women, when fear is moved aside and they're supported and surrounded in love, I see so many women making heroic and beautiful choices, and it's a privilege to witness it.
That's incredible. I do want to ask you something about the name you chose. Tell us about the significance of that, the special meaning there, and why you chose it.
Sure, I've always had a love for the Blessed Mother. I consecrated my life to Jesus through Mary the day after my first Holy Communion when I was a child. And so I've always been devoted to Our Lady. And I believe that she really won my vocation and protected my vocation. And I came across this title of Mary, Star of the Sea while I was serving in the Navy. And I just love this image. And it turns out that I discovered that this is the name that God wanted me to take in honor of our Blessed Mother. And as an image of life, like the church is this ship that goes through the seas of life, and sometimes it's dark and stormy, but Our Lady is this guiding light that guides us to the safe home, the harbor of her Son. So that's my name, Maris Stella, Star of the Sea, as she's the guiding light that leads us home to Christ.
So beautiful. We have maybe about a minute, little less than a minute left, but anything else that you would like to share with our audience, and maybe about vocation as well?
Sure, yeah, vocation is the greatest gift that you could imagine, if you only knew the gift of God. So if God is calling you, take courage, receive that gift. And I also like to speak a special word to any woman out there who may be suffering after the experience of abortion. We invite you to seek the Lord's healing. God's mercy is so great, and there's no sin too great for God's mercy. And so we, on our website, sistersoflife.org, we have a special page for our Hope and Healing mission for any woman who might be interested in knowing more about that and seeking greater healing in the Lord. And also any woman who might be pregnant and tempted to abortion. It would be our honor and our privilege to serve these women. And so we extend ourselves and open our hearts and know that we are praying for you, and we are would love to speak with you and get to know you.
Sister, thank you so much for saying that. You never know who's watching and who needs to hear that message right now. So thank you. Thank you for all that you do. It was an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
You're welcome. Thank you. God bless you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.